So thank you all so much for coming out on a Sunday night. I really appreciate it, and it's a big crowd. I think we're all concerned and happy to be here to be educated by Jay. My name is Tamara, Dalton. I'm the Regional Director for Action Together Western Norfolk County, which has worked with Jay to offer this informational community conversation. I'd like to thank my fellow members of Action Together, and especially Jay for making this forum possible. Thank you. Jay's practiced municipal law for nearly 2 decades. He has extensive experience representing cities and towns on matters pertaining to environmental law, land use, and affordable housing. As part of his practice, he has taken on many 40B projects around the state, including representing the town of Medfield in its recent defeat of an ill-conceived 40B proposal. As most of you know, the 40B housing law, also known as the affordable housing law, is a state statute which enables developers to seek broad exemptions from local bylaw if at least 20 to 25% of the proposed units have long-term affordability restrictions. The law is intended to provide lower-income families and individuals the ability to live in cities and towns with a high medium income level, but has, throughout the years, been misused by many developers to construct projects that are inconsistent with local needs. There are currently several proposed 40B housing developments in Norfolk. Some of these projects provide valuable housing opportunities, but others could pose substantial adverse impacts to residents and the environment. As I mentioned, this forum is being sponsored by Action Together Western Norfolk County. We're a nonpartisan group composed of members who identify as Democrat, Independent, and Republican. Members are united by common goals and shared actions. We network with existing progressive groups and build alliances to support worthy causes. We stand up for equal rights, religious tolerance, freedom of the press, environmental protection, science, facts, inclusivity, social justice, economic freedom, and fundamental human decency. Action Together also believes in education and collaboration. To that end, please be sure to attend Representative Dooley's forum on 40B and affordable housing on Wednesday, May 3rd at 7 p.m. at the King Philip Middle School. One can never be too educated about important issues. We care deeply about our state and the 23 communities in which our members live. Our next monthly meeting is Sunday, May 7th at the Knights of Columbus Hall in Walpole at 7 p.m. We hope you will join us, and feel free to speak with one of the other Action Together members here tonight. If you're here from Action Together, please raise your hand. Great, and we're all happy to talk with you. And without further ado, Jay Talerman.
Applause, wow. Again, my name is Jay Talerman. I live here in town. I'm also your town moderator and a member of a few other boards. This is going to work really well tonight if, when you have a question, you put your hand up. The people that know me here know I will keep talking for as long as there's something still for me to talk about. But if you have a question, put your hand up and let's talk about it. It is a community conversation. It's helpful. It either means I didn't explain something well, or it's something that we still have to get to. But either way, don't be shy. Whatever the question is, I'll be happy to answer it. As Tamara said, I've done a lot of 40B work over the years. I represent cities and towns. Right now, my firm is town council to about 15 towns. I used to work at a firm that was town council to about 1/3 of the towns in the Commonwealth. We've seen 40B through its trough and its peaks when it was doing a lot of development. It's back again now. It was gone for a little while. We faced these same kind of meetings a few years ago, pre-2008, when 40B was going like gangbusters. Not so much here, but in other towns. We had these very similar meetings to this one. So we're back again because banks are giving money for these projects. So I might have the unwelcome distinction of representing more towns and more 40B projects maybe than anyone, I think, than anyone based on the litigation record out there. What does that mean? It means that on the win and loss column, I've gotten my ass kicked a lot. This is a really hard statute. It's very difficult to work with. All the deference lines up in favor of the development communities and the subsidizing agencies. That doesn't mean you can't work with it. It doesn't mean that you can't work with good developers. It doesn't mean you can't fight against bad developers. There are tools in the tool shed. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight. I want to talk about what 40B is, what it isn't, what some of the myths are perhaps, how to prepare for it, how to work with the good projects, and again, how to really stand up if the community wants to and fight the bad projects. I've looked at the same list that everyone else has for the projects in this town. I worked on one of our not too distant past, the project right up there. I helped the zoning board on that. We worked on the Cleveland Street project a little bit. We've consulted on some of the other projects. There's a good spectrum in this town of the types of projects we have before us and the strategies the town could take. Okay, so let's get back to the beginning and when 40B started. 1969 is when 40B started. It was really designed as a housing program to help veterans from coming out of Vietnam to get back to their home communities and be able to afford a house. It was geared mostly at rental housing at the time. And Tamara mentioned that it's called the Affordable Housing Law. Really what they called it then, was the Anti-Snob Zoning Act. That's what it was called, and that's what you'll still see in some of the writing. And the reason they did that is Boston and Cambridge and Springfield and Worcester were taking all the burden for the affordable housing at that time, with the exception of housing authority projects, which were the sole projects that were really being done on the local level. And we have a wonderful housing authority project, two actually in this town that have providing long-standing benefits. So what did the statute say? It said you could seek, you weren't guaranteed them, that is a myth. You'll say that developers can throw your zoning bylaws out the window. That is a myth. They have to ask for it and they have to demonstrate that they need it for the project to succeed financially. They can seek waivers at the time, way back when, the waivers were really just about zoning, maybe a little bit of subdivision. Now, with all the layers of regulation since 1969, that means your local wetland bylaw, it means your general bylaws, anything that would touch development, with the exception of Board of Health requirements, a developer can seek a waiver from your local requirements. In exchange for that, they're going to build affordable housing. Now, it doesn't say anywhere in the statute what that affordable housing is going to look like or how it's measured or anything like that. It just says until you get to 10%, the deference is to the people proposing it. So that balancing test of no housing versus housing lines up more on the side of the developer. But it doesn't say 25%, it doesn't say 50%, it doesn't say any of that. That's more of a creature of regulation, and we're going to get into some of the problems with the regulation. So that is the process in a nutshell. Much more complicated than that, and we'll get into some of that. I don't want to get any deeper into the weeds than we have to, because I want to make sure we get some of the generals. So early on, throughout the 70s, there were controversial projects, but by and large, it was mostly rental projects, bigger rental projects. There weren't condo projects or townhouse projects or single-family house projects. That's because the subsidy and the statute requires that all affordable housing projects under 40B are subsidized by the state or federal government. Now, that could be the state or federal or local government doing it themselves, or a developer grabbing a subsidy from the state or federal government to build that housing. Now, those subsidies are competitive, and it's hard, and there's a lot of work to do to get them. So for the first 30-odd years of the statute, 25 to 30-odd years of the statute, the subsidies were far and few between. They were there, but they were mostly for rental projects. They weren't extending subsidies for either single-family or condominium projects. That's where it was. That's what people were building on. So that changed a little bit. Around 1989, 90, somewhere in there, a few things happened. The first is that the chairperson of the Housing Appeals Committee, which is the body, it's kind of a court set up to hear these 40B projects if there's a dispute after the zoning board, the chairman changed. That was a big event. The new chairman that took over, and he's now since retired, but his legacy unfortunately lives on a little bit. No fan of the suburbs. And look, let's be real about the suburbs here. We have done some good work in Norfolk to create some zones in downtown, as have other towns, what they call smart growth in your town centers. Out in the outskirts, you could have some bigger lots, but in town centers, you're supposed to, good planning says that's where you concentrate your development, near the T, near major routes, you do all that stuff. But truth be told, suburbs don't do enough of it, frankly, to get what would be to 10% or whatever would be a reasonable number for that. They try and they do their best and they can only control so much. I don't think that's any ill will or anything like that. It's change. And it's difficult to usher change, and it takes a 2/3 vote of town meeting to get change. So that's hard. But the backdrop is that truly if 40B worked and did what it was supposed to do, it would act as that carrot and stick to make sure that suburbs did their job a little bit more effectively. I'll tell you why I think it's somewhat of a flawed model in a second, but just to have that little aside for a second. So one thing, new chairperson, no friend of municipalities, started changing the standard and the presumptions and everything else. It used to be you'd have a fair fight before then between like, okay, I got a project, it's far away from the town center, it's near some wetlands or some ledge or something like that. You'd have a fair fight there. After that, no, there wasn't a fair fight. Towns essentially lost. The statistics still to this day at the Housing Appeals Committee, towns lose about 92% of the cases. That's a tough number. In regular zoning, on the other hand, so if the planning board issues a special permit or a zoning board issues it, towns win about 90%. So you can see it's really flipped. I don't think it was ever really intended to be that dramatic of a shift, but it is what it is. It really changed the way things work there. Flash forward a few years after that, and the biggest change happened. And that was that what was a tough regime to getting subsidies became very, very loose. Now there are private loans that have a tiny, tiny federal subsidy attached to them to keep the interest rates just a little bit low. In Massachusetts here, it's called the New England Fund. That was, through a series of test cases, made an available subsidy. It has next to zero relationship with HUD or DHCD. There's no tax credits, there's no big federal money, there's nothing coming in. This is private money that because of a little bit of federal insurance, it opened up the door. So we got a HAC chairperson who's going to give the developers the keys a little bit. We've got this new standard with essentially private money then infused. And with that, then they started amending the regulations. And they amended the regulations to really make it easy to get you through. They changed the standards, and I don't want to get that deep into this, into how you calculate what is an economically feasible project. Really bad, funny math. Nothing that a banker would lend on or anything else like that. It's really kind of gross pumping up of costs so as to say, oh, hey, I need 20 more units to be able to afford that project, so you have to say yes. So those things together opened up the door, not just for the traditional rental projects that we're doing under 40B, but the for sale projects. And that's what really changed it. So that was in around 2000 or so, we saw a flood. Everything from single family projects to condo projects, and those were happening everywhere. And they were coming fast and furious, and it was difficult to stop them. In fact, the message going out to the town from the state themselves, and they will not say this, is don't fight. Just find a way to say yes. Don't fight. You're going to lose. Don't fight. Now, I happen to think that is not a good strategy for a bad project, and very often you do have to maybe blunt the edges a little bit and settle a little, but the don't fight strategy was something that came out of the state. Now, in a few days, I think there's going to be some folks speaking at Representative Dooley's presentation on 40B. They're good people. I know them. They do good work. They tried hard, but their marching orders are way different and way less municipal centric than in my opinion they should be. So for example, Mass Housing, good agency, the person who's speaking from Mass Housing, or one of the two people speaking at Mass Housing in a couple of days, great guy, he was a town planner, understood the drill, works hard, will scrutinize, but 90% of the projects that come across their doorstep, they give the green light to, which means that green light is important because that's your ticket to go to the town. They're the gatekeeper, and they promised they would be a really strong gatekeeper and kick out the bad projects. And sometimes it works. That's what happened in Medfield, but it most often doesn't. There are over 90% of projects march on. I'm sorry, I just look at the projects that come into any given town. There is no way. I've seen some horrific projects get approved through that process. Okay, so,
Jay, is there any movement or way to push back and change that over time? It might be too late for us.
so, I mean, there's always a way, Julie, but I've drafted half a dozen bills. I was just telling Tamara and I were just talking about this. I've drafted a ton of bills. There was a repeal effort a few years ago for 40B. Nothing is going to get through the legislature because Boston, Cambridge, Worcester, Springfield, Pittsfield even, they have enough votes to kill anything. There's no forward momentum to get that done. I've seen good efforts. I did sit on a few committees that changed some of the regs, and we were able to claw something back here and there, but mostly the successes we've had on the municipal side have been through the courts, and they're few and far between there too. It's difficult. I mean, you can write, I know that Representative Dooley is interested in doing something that would maybe change the focus of it, and I applaud him in that. I've been down this road 100 times, and I just count on it not changing. Certainly not changing in a sweeping way. We have the tools that we have. We are where we are. And there are some things that can be done. I'd like to think that mass housing is getting a little better, but still, there are still over a 90% approval rate. So I don't want to be Debbie Downer about it, but it is real that we have what we have. And the projects that are either in the pipeline or close to the pipeline here in Norfolk, even if there was a will to change, they're coming if the developers can figure out their financing and all their other issues. So we'll have to deal with that in the normal course. So what's a town to do? So you have these properties. The town, what does the town try and do? They try and do what Norfolk tried to do to maybe stave it off a little bit. You develop some. We have zoning right here in the center of town and a few other areas, some various options to build multifamily housing that works and in a way that we can develop important affordable housing that gets done so we can make some progress to our 10%. The problem with doing it conventionally is that when you zone something, and let's just think about the way this works. When we develop zoning for a particular property, we're looking at property that can handle the particular type of housing product or business product that we're putting out there. The zoning sets the market. So whatever we do, we are setting the value for that. We're setting the value for land that could be developed. And when you set the value for it, that means the fair market value is going to adjust accordingly. And it's going to hit where it should be. It might take a little while for that fair market value to settle out to see what developers think about our new zoning, but they're going to find that medium on how to do things conventionally. And what that usually means is the price is going to go up as high as it possibly can for those vacant parcels so that the property owners can still sell it and make a buck, which means the margin is smaller for the developers. So if they then had to do 20 or 25% affordable housing, they couldn't do it. So the margin is based upon the whole notion that we have some requirements for maybe 10% housing for some of those, but the market's going to adjust for that. But not enough to really get us moving along the tracks to develop a lot. When we get closer, you get little bits of affordable housing here and there, but you're not getting those big chunks because for every affordable unit a developer builds, that's a wash with at least one market rate unit. The price of an affordable unit is about 200 grand. You can't build a unit for 200 grand of, say, 1,500 to 2,000 square feet.
Sorry, so what exactly is the definition of an affordable
Okay, so an affordable unit is deemed affordable if it's sold for a price that is affordable or rented at a price, but let's stick with the for sale because it's a little easier to digest. It's affordable for someone making 80% of median income. There are some programs where it's 50%. So what you do is you take a household adjusted for size, and you take 30% essentially. It changes a little bit here and there, but roughly 30% of that household's income, and then you use basic interest rates that are available, and you back into a price of what they could afford based upon devoting 30% of their income. So it goes up and down over time. It mostly goes up, but obviously 2008, went down a little bit. Roughly 200 grand, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. And it's also broken down by your statistical area. So here we're lumped into the Boston statistical area. So roughly about 200 grand. Here, out in Western Mass, would be a little less. So because the median income is generally lower. So they break those HUD, Housing Urban Development, breaks those numbers down there. So, but if you are building, you're building at, wood frame construction, you're not gonna get out of there without, it's 150, maybe as much, and if you're $150 a square foot, I mean, do the math. You're not going to make money on those affordable units. You're gonna lose, and perhaps you'll take a loss. So it's gonna take at least one market rate unit for you so you can see how the math doesn't work. So what do developers do? So they can either use the 40B in the areas in the center of town, but the prices are so high for those because again, it gets adjusted by the market because we set the market by creating zoning, that those aren't the properties that they're really looking for. Sometimes they do. I mean, those are the developers we like, the ones that will spend a little bit more on a good piece of property that we can work with. We like those. If we get those here in Norfolk, we should shake their hand and not let go of it until we have a project that works. Those are the good ones. That's what we like to do. Now those projects may not be what we ideally are seeking or what town meeting voted for. I like to say that they don't quite smell like a rose, those projects in those circumstances. They smell a little less like a skunk. So you try and work with those people best because they're doing it where you want it. So Town Hill is a good example of that. Came in with a bad project. Does anyone here remember when that came in? It came in really ugly. It looked like barracks housing. Yeah. So myself and a few other people worked with him. I was representing the zoning board at the time. We showed him to some architects. We shopped the project around. We redesigned it. Those are the people who work. It's where we want it. It's not the way our zoning board says it should be, or our zoning bylaws say it should be, or the density, but it's right where we want it. It doesn't impact any other residential neighbors. Maybe it's a little denser than what we had in mind. We got the architecture, I think, in a pretty pleasing place. It provides both some senior housing up there, as well as some full market rate housing, as well as 25% of them being affordable. Those are the people we like. But what 40B has really become a tool for, and this is, I think we see this play out a little bit here in Norfolk from time to time, is the development of property that is below fair market value. That a developer couldn't come in and build on it because it doesn't meet zoning, which means if it doesn't meet zoning, its price is going to be depressed. If its price is depressed, and the only way you could do it is by getting vast waivers from your local zoning, then those things are going to be snapped up. And that's occurring right now. It has occurred in the past in this town. It occurs in the next town over and the next town over for that. There are people looking at properties that are tough. They don't have enough frontage. They're steeply sloped. There's too much ledge. There's some locally defined wetlands. There's a whole host of issues that keeps that price low. You can come in and get a lot that has either no frontage or minimal frontage that you could develop for 4 single-family houses and drop 30 condos on it. Then you can make your money back, right? So if you get that, 200 grand and you're splitting it up, if it's a 28-unit project, that's 7 affordable, even if you wipe out 7 market rate, you still got 14 market rate units to make your money off of a $200,000 in land investment. Now granted, the infrastructure cost might be greater because it's a challenged piece of land, but you can see how the economics work. So I think the big flaw in the statute, and it has been for years, and I've railed against it until I'm blue in the face, truly, is that it unfortunately encourages use of marginal land. And that's a problem. We see it fold out. I don't really want to get into specific projects. I'm happy to do that here and there, but we see it fold out. You know, that's how it happens. That's what the statute does. That's the worst part of the statute. So, what can we do to plan around it? I want to get into how we deal with specific projects. What can we do to plan so we're better equipped to deal with projects or to fend them off altogether? Well, the first thing we can do, and there's been a lot of discussion on Facebook, and there's been really great discussion. I've seen a lot of hysterical social media over the years over 40B, what it is and what it isn't. I really applaud the level of dialogue and the temperature of dialogue in this town on various Facebook pages. I think people have been smart and civil about it. I think there's been a lot of good comments. I know I think we have 3, maybe just 3 of our planning board candidates. They've all spoken about it really artfully. I think that the dialogue is really great. Some of the things they talk about are achieving safe harbor status. Well, the granddaddy of them all for safe harbor is getting to your 10%. Hard, really hard. We're not there yet. The statute's been around since '69, and in 2 years, the census is going to change, so we're going to drop down a few percent after that. It's really hard to get to 10%. Technically, under the statute, there's only one safe harbor, and there's 10%, and that's it. They created out of thin air, though, these other benefits as trade-offs to the town. See what we're giving you, town, don't cry so hard about 40B, where if you get 2% per year or 1% per year, if you have a housing production plan, or if your geographic area where affordable housing is over 1.5%. There's all these other little safe harbors you can get to. We should try to. It's really hard. Medfield is trying to right now. Their numbers are a little more favorable than ours. They're trying, and it's really hard. They may get it before the project that I helped defeat comes back, and it's coming back. So that it sounds great. I love reading in the paper that we defeated a 40B project at an early stage. If they don't get to their safe harbor, it's coming back, and there's nothing we can do about it.
What is our number right now? Are we at about 6?
Kevin, do you know what the number is right now?
A little below 4, 325, 327 on this.
It's low, but we've got a lot of projects in the pipeline. So that's a low number, but, so the way some towns do it, and I was speaking to someone earlier who's here from Franklin. Franklin, for a little while, got to 10%. Very little, you know how they did it? And some towns, you kind of make a little bit of a deal with the devil sometimes. You do a big rental project somewhere. Like if someone wanted an Avalon Bay, which does a lot of rental projects, if they wanted to do a big rental project in some place that wouldn't crush us traffic-wise, and these rental projects are really not that burdensome on the schools, so that's somewhat of a benefit for them. That's how you jump ahead. That rental projects are treated differently than for sale projects. Rental projects, so if you did 25% housing, you had a 100-unit rental project, and only 25 of them affordable, all 100 count. For sale, if that same 100-unit project was for sale, only 25 of them would count. And that was, and I think it's a little archaic, that was, they developed that rule at a time when rents were lower than typical mortgage payment. And so they thought even the market rate units in a rental project would provide some workforce or moderate income housing. That's really not as true anymore. The apartments, well, there's some benefit, I guess, to being able to pick up and move a little bit more easily, but those rents are higher, but they're treated very differently. So a lot of towns, when they have the opportunity to grab a couple of big rental projects, they do it. So I'm town council in Easton, and they're building right on 106, behind the Target, great location, right behind it, a 300-unit project. It burdens literally no one in Easton. except I guess Target, and not even there. But it jumped them up a huge chunk right then and there. And those are some of the deals you make. Do I think that that's always the best deal to make? And
Jay, you say it burdens nobody, so you're saying only single couples are moving in, like it's not gonna burden the schools?
The statistics is less than a half a kid per unit for rental. And in the suburbs, it's even lower. In closer to urban areas, it goes up a little bit, but very, very low burden on schools for rental. So,
Does it count if it's also a 55+ rental?
yep. But the state really isn't approving much in the way of 55+
Okay.
projects anymore.
Okay.
So that ship has sailed a little bit too, just when we make a little progress. Peter, do you have a question?
Yes, do you know if Norfolk is anywhere near the 1.5%?
We are not.
We're not. Has anybody done the math?
I don't think the GIS work has been fully done on that, but there's enough. So the 1.5%, and that's something else where they change the rules constantly and what you can count and what you can't count. Now, we do have a lot of wetlands which don't factor into that, but we just don't have enough affordable housing in terms of its geographical footprint to get us there. The fights over 1.5% are generally in more highly
Can you
developed
explain that?
units.
What-
So it means if, roughly, and there's a whole bunch of rules on it, if 1.5% of your total land area minus wetlands and restricted property like conservation restrictions and things like that, if 1.5% of that area is devoted to affordable housing, then you're done. You don't have to deal with 40B.
It's another safe harbor.
It is one of the safe harbors, correct. We're not there. Question?
That 10% didn't get approved by the state. Is there a common denominator as to why those failed in front of the state?
Which?
Well, you say roughly 90% get approved by the state, these 40B applications. The 10% that didn't get approval,
Yeah.
is there a common denominator as to
I
why those
wish I
didn't?
could tell you there was, but it's really kind of haphazard. I mean, it is troubling to me as someone who works with land development all the time. I'll see a project that if I privately took a poll, and it would be just awful, and then I'll see a project that really isn't that terrible, and then for some reason they deny it. Now, the project that was just denied at that level in Medfield, it's not a good project. There was a lot of problems with it, and there was a lot of problems with the developer, and there was a great push by Medfield itself. They really did themselves a solid by working so hard, and I want to get into that a little bit too. But they're really, if I compared it to their greatest hits, so to speak, there are projects that are so much worse that they just have no problem. I did a project in Sandwich that was literally right next to the busiest runway at the Air Force Base. When the Air Force Base was fully operational, that was F-16s every 40 minutes, 24 hours a day. It violated multiple federal law, and they had no problem with it. None. I mean, so there is, we try and look for common threads. Some of the things that we see in some of the cases are as simple as a minor traffic thing, or usually emergency access for firefighting has been a little bit of a theme we can follow, but it's really hard to figure it out. So I always, because the best cases at the court level are emergency access cases of all the things. Now, that's a really important issue, don't get me wrong, but of all the things that are out there that are bad about bad projects, that's the one we've had the most success on, so I really tell towns to key on it. So, Sue?
Sure, Jay. So I spoke with somebody at Mass Housing about a little bit about the Medfield project, and she said what you just said about the push, but she also said that the developer was not willing to budge, and that was a tremendous part of why Mass Housing, why it was turned down, that he would not work with.
So that's some insight. So this is true. So, but let's play that out a little bit. So a project's either bad or it's not bad.
Okay.
So in Brookline, I was working with the town, and a project came in and it was a different subsidizing agency, but same drill. And the town wrote like a 75-page letter. It was incredibly comprehensive. Now, they're very staffed up in Brookline, so they really put this great letter together. And it went to Mass Development, which is essentially the equivalent of Mass Housing. We, through a public record search during the litigation, we had all their documents. They had written a letter of a denial and took it to the developer and said, this project is bad for X, Y, and Z. We are going to deny it for those reasons unless you address these issues. So the developer went back to the drawing board and didn't change X, Y, and Z at all, not at all. And they had a full planning staff saying, this is exactly why your X, Y, and Z is bad for the town of Brookline. They changed something way across the project, gave a few token units in terms of a density reduction, and then they approved it. So this is my problem with some of these subsidizing agencies. So if the guy in the developer in Medfield, if he had taken a few units off, great, that all of a sudden makes it a good project. All the reasons they said it was a bad project are reasons it should never be allowed there. But I can promise you that if they just take a floor off or something like that the second time around, it's gonna sail through. I've seen it a dozen times. That to me is not the kind of planning that our subsidizing agencies should be providing. DHCD or Mass Housing, they have a duty, a fiduciary duty, I believe, to cities and towns. This is not helping. If something's objectively bad, say it's bad. And if someone wants to come back, now great, if in the process they fix the bad parts, great, but just because the developer was recalcitrant, that's a reason, so that's what I don't get. And I've already spoken to the developer, I know they're coming back, they know the drill, they know the second time around, it's likely to get through. This is why Medfield is trying so hard to get to their safe harbor before it becomes a real project.
What if like protected species, like plants or animals are found on the property?
So that has been helpful to a certain degree. That's one of the few agencies that have stepped up. So those aren't local rules. That's a state program for endangered species. Towns don't regulate that, but a developer can't waive that. I have seen a few 40B projects go down the tubes because they don't meet those standards. Generally speaking, that happens after they get through the zoning board. A developer will hold off a little bit, but it's a real issue, and it's something that we've used to our advantage. The typical standard, which they relax a little bit, is if they find a certain kind of truly endangered species, and there's all kinds of tiers of what is an endangered or protected or rare species. If they find the right kind, they'll say 70% set aside of that property for open space, and that's usually enough to kind of force the developer's hand. Those are few and far between too. I mean, a good developer will check that first. There's an atlas that's available online. If they see you're there for the eastern box turtle or one of the other turtles most frequently that I've seen, they'll usually walk away from the property. That's publicly available info, so it's easy to check. It's certainly an avenue. So, any other questions on?
Just to follow up, so if you wanted somebody to survey the property just to see if maybe there was some type of protected species back there, would you just go to the Audubon, or like how would you go about that other than just?
Well, again, it's on, so there's a few ways that happen short of trespass, which I'm not recommending. It could be on the state atlas. If it's on the state atlas, then it's on the state atlas, and they would have to go through a lengthy process to disapprove the state atlas. There have been situations where the town has then tried to register properties for the atlas by saying, hey, we have found these species. Here's the problem with it happening, like let's say it's not on the atlas, but there's good eyewitness testimony from the next door neighbor who saw this particular species on the next door neighbor's property, and the zoning board then says, hey, I want this thing, I want your property to be reviewed for endangered species. The developer, if they're not particularly friendly developer, I mean, if they're a good guy and they're willing to work through issues, then they'll say, sure, you know, we'll get a wildlife guy, or you guys get a wildlife guy and I'll pay for him and we'll see what's out there. For a developer that doesn't want to do it, they'll say, no, I'm not doing it. you're not coming on my property, I'm not on the atlas. And because that's a state requirement, it's not an issue in 40B. So even if there's a good suspicion that there is, the Housing Appeals Committee, again, this kind of administrative court that I talked about earlier, they won't look at it. We used to be able to get a little leeway, but they said that's a state issue. That's not a local zoning issue under 40B. So again, they keep changing the rules every time we get a little hook on something that where we can maybe make some progress on it, then they shut the door right behind us.
Because I have something going into my backyard, basically, and one day I was mowing the yard a couple of years ago, and there was a red toad back there. I have pictures of it, and, I mean, I've never...
Call Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program at Mass Wildlife. Have them come out, see what they say. They're the ones, not Audubon, not anyone else. It would be Natural Heritage. What are some of the other things? So, okay, here.
I'm just wondering if a developer puts together a proposal, and that proposal includes the use of town property, who is able to give that right to the developer?
So what kind of town property?
Drainage,
Okay.
like a catch basin, that presumably was built to then be able to deal with future town center development, or a access road that isn't paved, that's just sort of this old
Okay.
abandoned railroad bed.
So, and the reason I ask,
She knows a friend. She has a friend.
I think I'm familiar with what you speak.
Yes.
So, the reason I ask what kind of infrastructure is it matters. So the cases are all over the map. My firm won a case a few years ago where all the traffic engineers said that the sight lines on the curve and the roadway were bad. And so the developer said, I want an easement across my neighboring property owner, which was the town, and I can force that through under 40B, and the court said no. You can't change someone else's property rights.
Okay.
And that's generally true. Now, it changes a little bit when you talk about, say, sewer or water infrastructure. Drainage could potentially be in the same boat. Again, those are municipal properties or municipal easements at the very least. And you would like to say, well, no one can force the town. That's not a regulation you can waive. You can waive regulations and bylaws. You can't waive property rights.
Right.
But if the town had a practice of giving other entities access and they still had the capacity to handle the drainage or the water or anything else like that, then they might say, well, you're doing it for other people, so you have to treat this project the same way. So for example, in Walpole, there was a project that required the access to town sewer. And the developer was willing to pay for it, and the town said, we're not willing to provide it, that's ours. And that would be an extension in digging up our roadways. And what the court ended up saying was, you've done it for the last 18 developers or whatever it was, you can't say no to them just because it's affordable housing. So you can kind of see how it lines up. But then, in the town of Grafton, in a case that we were successful in, they had, the developer wanted to tap into water infrastructure. They were going to extend the pipes out. The town was able to demonstrate that we have a limited amount of water capacity in our public water system, and we already have a plan, and this is the next topic I want to get to. We've already planned on who gets water next in this town, because not everyone had it. A lot of people were on wells. It was a legitimate plan. It had been in place in years. We were just working at getting the money together to feed these new neighborhoods. And now you're going to take it all, everything we have left? That's outside of our plan. And the town was successful in defending that issue. So it really kind of depends what the issue is. In terms of unfinished roadway, I don't think a developer could force a town to pave a roadway.
But what if the developer said, oh, I'll pave it?
If the town
Or what
had
if the
a
town
history-
said, hey, we want this paved, will you do it for us?
Again, this is also something I'm going to get into. If there's a deal to be had and it makes sense for the town, sometimes towns make that deal.
So, on that exact issue, should those discussions and deals only be made during public hearings, or is it common practice for developers to go into town office and chit-chat with decision makers?
There's chit-chatting going on. So, and I don't mean specifically here. I mean, that's what
Is that common practice
Look,
to? You got a bunch of
mitigation,
deals in town.
Development agreements and mitigation and contract zoning and paying money to get certain things, or giving back infrastructure or money to the schools, or building a field or doing something like that. It's not the oldest profession, but at least the second oldest. So, I mean, developers have been doing this for a long time, and they do it under 40B effectively. You make all kinds of deals. Some of them are great deals. Some of them, people, especially abutters to projects, think, hey, you know, I know it might be there are some greater good involved, but I'm getting screwed here because this project shouldn't be happening at all. So there are deals, ultimately, they have to be made in public but they're often negotiated at the staff level first. There is some availability for some executive session, which is a private meeting of a board, depending upon the issues at stake, like property rights, that can be done a little bit in private. Eventually, it has to be put in the light of day, but there's a lot of behind the scenes. Yeah, I mean, just to full honesty,
Yeah, that's
it
what-
happens. We do it, and sometimes it's good. Sometimes I mean, you have to know your audience. Sometimes a developer will work well with you in the private sense and do the most. Sometimes they need to be, I need to have my zoning board say in public, what will you give us if we give you that?
Yeah, right.
And you'll negotiate these great deals right there in public, and they respond well to that. So it happens in both ways.
How much notice is an abutter given before a project?
All right, so let's go through a timeline, then I want to get back to something here. So let's say developer X interested in a piece of land, negotiates a purchase and sale agreement with it, wants to go through the process. Let's say that happens today. They need, the first thing that they have to do on their road to a 40B project is get this project eligibility letter from a subsidizing agency. And that could happen from any number of different subsidizing agencies, but let's just say it's Mass Housing. So if you did that, so you've got to, before you can even apply, you have to demonstrate that you went to the town first and said, what do you think about this project? Usually that goes to the Board of Selectmen. Sometimes it would go to multiple boards. Sometimes they'll talk to the fire chief or DPW or the water department or whatever. A good developer will talk to as many people as possible. A developer knows that if they're building or proposing something that's kind of not going to be popular, they'll talk to one entity, do it as quickly as they can. They're not allowed to give that application to get project eligibility from the subsidizing agency, though, until they speak to at least the chief executives, which would be the Board of Selectmen in the towns around here. In Franklin, it would be the town council, or at least Jeff Nutting, the town administrator, at the very least. But so they have to do that first. That takes a little bit of time to get that done. Call that a month. You know, you got to set up a meeting, you do some site visits, some usually 2 months, you know, some planning going on. So it takes a little while. Then they apply to, let's say the town says, no, we don't like that project, but they want to go forward anyway in a more adversarial manner. Then they apply to the subsidizing agency. The subsidizing agency, it's a lengthy application, will then give the town 45 days or so. It's technically, I think, 30, but 45 is usually bargained. If it's a big project, we'll sometimes bargain for even more extensions on top of that to do a response. During that response period, there's some back and forth. Sometimes it gets, you know, there's a site visit, things get elongated. Let's call that, so the town gives its response in 30 days, so now you're 2 or 3 months deep. And then the subsidizing agency, if it's a tricky project, if it's a no-brainer project, they'll act quickly. But if it's a trickier project, it'll take a little while, 3-4 months, call it. So then, once they get that letter, that letter is good for 2 years for them to apply. That's when they start getting their plans together and then go to the Zoning Board of Appeals.
And have the abutters been notified at all?
No.
In this process? No.
And
this
these aren't public meetings either.
Well, if it's before the Board of Selectmen, that would be a public meeting.
Okay.
It wouldn't be a public hearing, but
Right.
it would be a public meeting.
Right.
So does the state have to approve something? I'm a little confused with the,
State, you have to get your ticket to go.
so the state has to start, then they go to the mass housing.
No, no.
No, the state is
The state is Mass Housing,
And they pretty much say yes to everybody.
unfortunately. So then you go to the zoning board. You apply to the zoning board. That's when abutters get notice.
Okay.
That's when things are in the newspaper. That's when it becomes much more of a public issue. When that happens, the zoning board has 30 days to start their hearing. Sometimes that it gets elongated again by agreement, but they have 30 days to start their hearing. That hearing can go at least 180 days, so, and then it can be bargained for more. So, but the town normally has 180 days per regulation to make their decision, 6 months. And usually a hearing a month, sometimes 2 hearings a month. If a developer asks for a continuance, that adds an extra month to it. Large projects almost always go beyond the 180 days. Usually could go a year before a zoning board of appeals. So that's the local process. That's not even touching the litigation end, which is another 5-year cycle on top of all that. Which,
So once it gets to the point that someone's officially notified, like in a butter, is there any chance at that point to stop the project? Like once it's gotten that far?
I think there's always a chance. I mean, yeah, I mean, it depends when and where and what your fights are and what your tools are at that time. It depends if the town wants to stop it. Difficult, abutters have a much more difficult case than the town does. It's just hard for an abutter to stop the project. Tamara?
So what if we just tell the developer no? Like, is that not a possibility? Do we lose state funds?
At the zoning board level, you don't lose state funds. You're allowed to say no. It does potentially affect you later if it's maybe even partially subjectively a good project and you're saying no to everything, and then the next project comes in and and it's a really bad one and you want to say no. There is a little boy that cried wolf syndrome to that a little bit. So, but look, I'm a fan of saying no when you should say no. And there's a lot of attorneys out there that will not say that. They just give the advice, find a way to say yes quickly. But when no is the right answer, and I've said this in some of the Facebook chats that have been around, when no is the right answer, say no and stick up for yourselves. And there's some benefits to that. There?
I want to touch on something you brought up a few minutes earlier on the water issue. It was my understanding from other meetings that if a town has an issue with their water supply already, that they can't deny a development because they can't supply the water to that development, that's the town's problem, that the 40B can still go through even if the town is in a critical water situation with what they have already in town.
Well, I mean, it depends. If the developer wants to tap into that water supply and the town, again, the case law suggests that if a town, let's take Norfolk for example. We have a limited water supply. It can only feed so many houses. And there are still people waiting for water in this town that would love to have it. And if I were the selectman and I was looking at the cases, and I'm not crapping on the selectmen at all, I think they're very interested in this subject. I've had a lot of good conversations with them over the years. We work with them on these things. They should develop a plan, a house by house, street by street plan of who gets water next. And if the developer is going to upset that plan rather than go to the back of the line, then the cases do help us. But it's got to be convincing and clear. If the developer says, you got enough water for everyone, you just don't want to do it. You can't hold our water hostage. If you say you're trying to help all these people, you have this much capacity left, you haven't built a new water main in 11 years or something like that. I'm not saying that's the case here. They might have some persuasive pushback on that. Some developers too, for a larger parcel, will do their own water supply. It's expensive. They would have to be a lot of units. No one's doing that for 16 or 30 or even 100 units. It would be hard. The bigger projects might do their own water supply.
So even for a town to put a plan together like that at this stage on 40B, the state would look at it as, well, you should have had this in place a year ago, not to put it in place now because you're trying to thwart these 40 years.
It's hard to be a Johnny-come-lately on that, for sure.
So who decides who gets water or not?
Selectmen. Well, the Board of Water Commissioners, which is essentially the selectmen here, DPW. So that's a process. I mean, they have a limit. It costs money. It's really expensive to expand water mains and do that. It's hard enough to raise taxes around here you got a 2.5% levy limit. The schools need some, police, fire, DPW, just to keep potholes filled around here.
So how long has it been in Norfolk, the community, that people do not have water?
I
and
couldn't
only
even
have wells?
begin to tell you that. I don't recall a major water expansion in a little while. I think that they have plans. It's just millions of dollars to push water down the road, to extend a water main.
Right, I agree, but if the town has been pushing the issue for the last 40, 50 years for people that don't have water, then all of a sudden now developments come in and add 104 units. Where do we see the
Look,
people?
I mean, if the infrastructure is there and there's enough water for them, and it gets very complicated. If the water is in the main street out in front of the development, they have different rights than if they have to run a line down a roadway. History matters, and that, I think the message I'm trying to say is what the town did before they had the 40B in matters a lot, how they have planned for it. And that kind of leads me to my next point. You know, again, we had 4 good planning board candidates, and that's my plug for everyone to go out and vote on Tuesday. We got people working their butt off trying to volunteer for boards and run. Please, everyone, go out and vote. I'm not here to plug anyone in particular, but please read all their materials. They're all putting themselves out there. It's uncomfortable enough for them to do it. Vote for 2 of them, please. But this was a big topic of discussion at candidates night the other night, which I was moderating and which everyone talked. I got a stack of cue cards for all the questions for all the candidates. 75% of them were about 40B. I kind of distilled it to 1 or 2 questions, and they all did a really good job. But the planning board actually has a huge role about how we plan for the future. So one of the major defenses in 40B, you might have seen on Facebook about us developing a better or updating our housing, what's called a housing production plan. Essentially, it's an affordable housing plan that gets certified by the state, whereby if under that plan, if we have that plan certified and we develop, we increase our percentage from the 4% we have now to 5% in a year, then we get a year's break. So that's essentially how it works, and it can be really effective. But you have to do, that's one tool, that's a safe harbor. But in addition to that, the state, if we have to fight a 40B, we will get a huge amount of credit in that fight if we not only develop that plan, but good master plans. So the planning board develops a master plan every 10 years or so. I was on the last master plan committee. If we develop a good master plan committee, we develop good zoning. So all these things, we have legitimately certified, voted on plans. So that's 1, get a plan. 2, if those plans provide for bona fide, really smart, affordable housing near town center, in the appropriate areas, the kind of development that the state wants us to do, what they call smart growth. So that would be kind of like the project up here, or some of these things that are closer. Again, I'm not the hugest fan of the project over near Old Town Hall, but that kind of counts because it's kind of in our central corridor. I think there's some great parts about that project, but it wouldn't be necessarily how I would design it, but so be it. So if we develop a plan, it provides for affordable housing, and we actually get the affordable housing built either on our own or through relationships with developers, that's a huge tool. So that is when I have to go into court and fight why this project is inconsistent. Let's say we get a project, the town developed a plan, affordable housing near town center. In the last 5 years, they've developed like 3 or 30 units right near their town center. It's great, everyone loves it. We get our picture in the magazine, it looks awesome. And then someone wants to go develop something in the furthest corner, most rural part of town that doesn't fit in with the character of that area and isn't what we worked so hard and voted on at town meeting. I have a good shot at defeating that, not necessarily at the zoning level, but once we get to court. So those kinds of planning efforts, that's the kind of things we have to do. So it's not just about water or this and that, it's all of those things together. If we walk the walk and talk the talk and actually do things, and And sometimes that means kind of gritting your teeth and making a deal with a developer you might not love, on a project you might not love, but you can stomach well enough to kind of, okay, it doesn't look so great, it wouldn't be what I had in mind, but it's getting us there and it prevents a really bad project across town. Those kinds of things are helpful. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in with these projects right there.
So has Norfolk ever had a housing production plan?
We did, and it lapsed, I believe.
So why would it lapse? I mean, I'm just curious as to why that wouldn't be.
It never got certified?
Never got certified.
Right. So they're working on one now. But again, you know, these kind of, trust me when I say it is not a magic bullet. None of this
Right,
stuff is
but
magic.
it's something that I would think that the Board of Selectmen, having a lot more experience in this than the average citizen, why wouldn't that be something that would just be on the to-do list all the time?
I think, you know, in fairness to them, and none of them are here to defend themselves, I've talked to them, it is very much on their to-do list. It is not, first of all, it costs money to do. Second, it's a lot of planning and a lot of work. And then it's got to go sit in the state and get it done. I have reason to believe from my conversations that it is very much in the front of their mind. So I'm not making excuses for it not getting done, but I'm also not going to sit here and say that there's no excuse for them failing to get it done. So it's a lot of work right there, and then I'll come back here.
Where is the developer at in the process of this particular project?
Well, I don't know what particular project you're talking about, because we've got like 4 of them.
7.
Can I tell you?
Which one? I think that they've applied for project eligibility, and the town has written a response letter. I expect a lot of back and forth there.
So do we know the developer has already signed the PNS for this?
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I've seen some plans. I believe they have it under agreement if they didn't buy it out. I don't know. I can't tell you that.
He owns the land already.
Yeah, he may own it, which means, I mean, that people have been trying to develop that property for years. I mean, I have my own feelings about that. I mean, I've walked that property in the past when it came up for other developments. It's a challenging piece of property at the very least. Again, I don't want to get too much into specific projects. I don't want to impugn anyone's motives for trying to develop it or try to fight it. I think it's a really challenging project. Let's leave it at that. I'd be happy to have offline conversations on my thoughts on that. I don't know who is next here. Right there?
This is probably an ignorant question, but does it have to be new housing? Can existing housing in any way be transformed into
Yes.
affordable housing?
Redevelopment, big.
Do we have
State
a
loves
plan?
their redevelopment.
Well, you know, there are grants and subsidiaries for that.
Yes.
So why can we pursue that as a town?
Sure.
But
What do you
I
have
don't
in
know,
mind?
but I don't know if there are properties that come up. Well,
We are doing it. But there could be, you know, in fairness, so there could be small projects too.
Right.
So it can happen, like you could take an existing, in fact, at one point, the White House that I think is right near the entrance to the housing authority, the town had some
Yes.
interest and
Right.
they were gonna break it into 4 units. The very first house I bought in this town and lived in, 900 square feet over on Needham Street, got bought by the Housing Trust and converted to an affordable unit last year.
Okay.
Brought a tear to my eye. It was awesome, great result. The Housing Trust does great work every year. Incremental benefits, but I tell you, when the state looks at us making every single little gain like that, 4 units. I mean, it's not like we have a big old mill in
Right.
town where we can rehab it and create some towns do. That they've taken through
Yeah.
tax title foreclosure or whatever, and they can do that. 2 units here, if that's part of our, I'm sure it would be the planning board and the selectmen would make that part of whatever affordable housing they had.
But even the old town hall sits there with, I don't know anything about the structure, but there seems to be places that maybe there are houses that are a little more affordable on the market, that if there were grants or things we could apply for.
So one thing we do, so in the town of Bellingham, we create an affordable housing bank. There, we work with a few developers on town council there. And through an inclusionary zoning process, when they build a big subdivision, they have to develop either in the subdivision or outside of it. And they're buying distressed properties and converting them and cleaning them up and making them affordable, and we're kind of creating a bank to be used for other units. Sue, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up some information to kind
Please stand up so we can hear you across the room.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi.
Sue Jacobs and everybody.
In the last 5 years, the Affordable Housing Trust has purchased 19 properties and added them onto our subsidized housing inventory. However, as we all know, the housing market right now, 2 years ago, I could buy a home like Jay described for $275,000. Today, that same home is selling for $375,000. So we have a formula that we have to work with to be able to purchase the home and then sell the home at a reduced rate, deed restricted, to an affordable buyer. We've done 19 homes in a short period of time, but the economy is certainly changing the number of homes we're going to be able to purchase.
So when everyone in this room goes to town meeting, and as your moderator, I'm assuming everyone in this room is going to town meeting in 2 weeks, and when the article comes up to give some of our community preservation money to the Housing Trust, please vote yes enthusiastically. It's an important purpose. We're doing good. 19 homes is a lot more than most small suburban communities are doing. That is incredibly good work. It is thankless, it is hard work, they got to do a lot of negotiation. It's really important, but it's also important for all the reasons that I said. If that's a key component and we can walk that walk and talk that talk, it's going to be persuasive if I end up or your town council ends up having to fight it. Sometimes that's me, sometimes it's someone else. So, a question here?
Just out of curiosity, what are the absolute numbers? I don't know myself.
What we would have to get to, Greg, Kevin, do you know what our,
Just to have some idea what we need to get to.
what's our 10% total number?
We need 311.
So there's
And we'll be at-
311 units, right? That's what we would need to get 10%. I believe our numbers right now, please don't hold me to this because I don't have it in front of me, but I believe right now our subsidized housing inventory is somewhere around 141, 148. And in 2020, as Jay said earlier,
The denominator changes.
a new census will come out, and our number will be completely different. So if we were able to somehow obtain it, come 2020, we're going to be back below 10%.
Right, okay, so then we will be continuing.
Right, so we're maybe halfway there now, and that number's going
So
to go up.
just, I don't know if I got it, do we have 140 towards 311, or we need?
We have about
more?
between 140 and 148, I'm not sure the number, towards the 311.
Okay,
So we're a little more, we're
Can let me just say this about that. Anyone that thinks that, especially with the projects that are out there right now, that is going to be any kind of ticket to exempt us from anything is wrong.
Then what is going to be a kind of ticket?
That like some kind of panacea, some kind of magic bullet. The safe harbor is not coming to bail us out on that. We would need to get a huge chunk of affordable housing to even and potentially have the housing production plan to make any progress at all. We're just not given these. Now in the future we should, but for everything we've got in the pipeline right now, what we have to rely upon is our boards, our selectmen. If they're bad projects, we have to fight them. If they're good projects, we should approve them. If they're in between, we have to try and bang them into something we can stomach. Let's talk about like Cleveland Street for a second. So I don't think that there's anyone in this room, unless the developer's here, and if he is, then so be it, that thinks that Cleveland Street is a project that we would love to do over and over again. It was a piece of agriculturally used property for years. It has one way in and one way out. It is not an ideal site. It doesn't fit in with our master plan. It doesn't fit in with our zoning. It is sticking a fairly dense project far away from our town center. It's not walking distance and anything. So we talk about the state liking things or not liking things. It fails the smart growth scorecard. Not near schools, not near, it just doesn't meet it. But, and I'm not an advocate for the project, I'm not saying that. That's a project though, because when the traffic guy says it's not, even though there might be some minor inconveniences here and there, it's not gonna crush traffic there. When the fire department says that they can get their ambulance and their fire department in there after it was redesigned substantially without any loss of time to respond to emergencies, when they demonstrate that there's not any impacts, they moved a bunch of it away from some wetlands, there's really not much choice at that point. That wouldn't be a project. I'm all for fighting bad projects, and that's not the one you throw money at to fight necessarily. Now, that can be subjective a little bit too. What they did was they made it a little bit better. It's that middle tier of projects. And again, I'm not a fan of the project. I'm not trying to say that I am, but there is some pragmatism that you have to apply. So we've got 7 projects in the pipeline. Some of them are going to go. Some will go quicker. Some will probably fight. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Those are really tough choices.
I just wanted to say this more as a point of information to Tamara's point earlier, like why can't we just say no? I live across the street from the 84 Cleveland Street project, and what we were told at a lot of those meetings, as we listened to the changes and the adjustments that were made, making it a little bit less awful, but we were eventually told if the town works for the developer all along and they make those changes and then the town says no, then when the developer goes to the state, if they win at the state level, he can go back to his original proposal. So we got him down to 36 units. He was originally approved for 44 units. So if the town says no and the developer brings it to the state and the state says okay, he can then put in the 44 units.
And there are some safeguards for what we can do along that negotiation where I'll say to a developer, and he'll say, I'm not going to commit to the 36 until you say yes. Someone's got to jump first and put their cards in there first, or raise the pot, or do whatever first. I will usually try and get them to give an agreement, and then at the state level I'll say, well, they say they need the 44 now, but they said locally they only needed 36 to make a buck. But you got to spend $30,000 in litigation to get there, whereby, look, we've got 3 bad projects coming that are objectively bad, and we got to sink some money into that. There's a limit of resource. We pay town council services of roughly $100,000 a year. If we fought every single one of the 7 projects in the pipeline, I mean, the only people that are going to be happy are the lawyers. Now, which is a good thing. But it gets difficult. There's expenditure of time, and while those projects are going, sometimes, and it gets your, look, it wouldn't be what I want to have across the street from me. I feel badly whenever this happens, but those are the projects that are, it's not 100 units, it's not 60, it's a little bit screened from the street, it's, the visibility, you work on the sight lines, you do the best you can. My experience on those is that over time, they kind of grow into the neighborhood a little bit at that kind of low level density. Still, I hear you. So I'm right there with you, but there is something to be said here and then Jill over there.
What's your experience or recommendations around being strategic to influence design on a friendly 40B? Because, I mean, they could put in multi-level units that are, hideous, like on Franklin's Gorelick Farm.
Yes.
140. I mean, nobody wants to be looking at that, but that could happen if we keep saying.
But Franklin loves that project.
Well,
not the people in Franklin.
Right. I'm just saying that we aesthetically.
The boards, it's essentially in Bellingham.
Yeah. Right.
So
But how can you?
Look, I think aesthetics are really important.
Right.
I'm someone who cares about site planning.
Yeah.
I've been doing this long enough. I like a good site plan. I like people to do good work. It doesn't cost anything to get your facades and your building architecture. It's an incremental expense to move units around here and there. It's when you start increasing the cost of their roads, their cost of construction, or you start reducing units that you start getting into real money. But I like to spend, when I'm working with a developer and a board, I like to spend a lot of time. I'd like them to get their architect in and really make things better. This thing on Town Hill, I think, was was a success story in terms of a design element. We worked really hard on it. We spent 2 or 3 meetings refining the architecture. I think it worked out, and the site planning and how it worked. Again, not ideal, not what the town meeting voted for on that site, but, you know, not altogether tough. I think I had Jill over here first.
The 141 or 48 that she said that we already have for affordable housing, does that include everything in that, does that include Rivers? I don't know if Rivers Edge.
Rivers Edge has no affordable units.
They're all over $200,000, wow.
Oh, they're way over.
Well, how about?
Robin's laughing right here.
How about, 115 and Marshall Street, are those affordable units, those are units, do they count in that 140?
On Arnold Drive, those are 100% affordable. That's a housing authority property.
Oh, right, so they count.
That
Nope,
number
nope.
includes all,
Everything in the town.
the senior housing, it includes.
Hillcrest Village and Arnold, those are 100% affordable, 100% subsidized through our housing authority, not the housing trust, the housing authority, which is kind of a state agency but with local officials.
And that's in the number, that's in the affordable.
That's in the number.
Okay.
Getting back to your point, it would be nice if we could reach that safe, number with just one, I mean, I guess that everyone would say, well, not my backyard, not my backyard.
You make
Having
it,
one big rental property.
on some, you have to know when you're making, if that deal with the devil, so to speak, is a good one. So sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't, because someone's always going to be impacted by a property, no matter what. So we just talked about this one in Franklin. It's practically, does everyone know what we're talking about? You go past Gorelick and you're almost at Maple Street in Bellingham. And it's a big project, and most people in Franklin are like, good, we can get our numbers back up. But there are neighbors there, and there are people that drive that route. It doesn't make sense for someone. So some people have said Southwood or something like that. It's 1A, who cares? Well, you know what though? Everyone that grew up around Pondville and in those neighborhoods, they care. So there's always someone that, look, if it's a perfect thing and you make those deals, and I'm not against making those deals, but it's really, the stars have to align for it. And the truth about Norfolk in terms of big rental projects is, it's the same reason why we don't have a supermarket. It's because there's not enough vehicle trips through this town. It's not on the way to anything. This is what we love about Norfolk. Right? I mean, it stays quiet. 8 or 10 ball games a year where people might cut through to go to the Patriots game. Otherwise, we get a really low, if you look at, even 109 in Millis gets way more traffic than we ever get through on 115. That's if there's not enough car traffic, then people aren't going to come. It's just the nature of the beast. It's just, that's the way it goes. So that's a good and a bad thing. The other thing I really hope Norfolk never does, because it'll really open the spigot for more multi-family kind of affordable development. Don't go with sewer. I know that we all face expenses with replacing our aging septic systems. It's a pain. Everyone has to do it. I'm begging, and I have in the past, and I'll do it in the future. We should not do that. So that will fundamentally change the character. Let's go here first, and then Karen, did you have a question too?
I did.
How about you first?
Well, I just wanted to know, where do we as a public go to understand all the pending projects that are out there? I've heard 4 projects, I've heard 7 projects, I've heard 140 units. I don't even know where all that information is housed, so we can get educated on what is actually pending currently in the town.
The selectmen in the town administrator office have that info.
Okay.
I know that someone posted like a list of that today.
On the Norfolk
I saw
Community
on
page.
Facebook.
Kevin
She has a
just
piece of
posted it.
paper right there.
Some of it
Jay?
right on the
Jay?
town website.
Some of it right there, sure.
Town planner?
Breakoff probably has a bunch of that. I know Ray is going to be speaking at Representative Dooley's event, so maybe he'll be able to describe some of them, maybe not.
But if we searched on the town website, we should be able to find it.
Probably get some of it. I
Okay.
mean, you get some of the info that way.
It really is, John, that's.
Town halls, like that information are easily accessible, because I've spent hours trying to get that kind of information out
not in one place. And I think it would require all of us calling town hall and saying, can somebody consolidate this information so that we can get educated without having to...
I do think too, in speaking to Selectman Lehan a few weeks ago, they are going to have their own public meeting that'll kind of explain where they are and what they're doing. I think I'm going to be helping them with that meeting too. I don't know, I don't think they've scheduled it yet, but I was speaking to Jack Hathaway. That's in their plan. They want to get through town meeting and their budgets first, and then I think they'll settle in. They want some information out there. I've spoken to a few of them, and people that know me know that I don't always speak to the Board of Selectmen, but there's a good relationship. They're really trying to get information out there right now, so I think it is helpful. Let me talk a little bit about the fight. So I've talked a little bit about why it's not a bad thing to fight, when you have to fight. Now, without saying whether or not any of these 7 projects coming in are bad projects, I think at least one of them, if not more than one of them, are bad projects. So, that being the case, here's why I say sometimes fight and why the state says no. Okay, so the win-loss ratio is bad. Why would you fight? Why would you be advising? Surely you just want to line your own pockets with litigation fees. Trust me, my wife, who's here, knows that I have enough work without the litigation on top of it. So that is not why I say it. The reason I say it is because you win by fighting even if the win-loss ratio doesn't make it seem like you do. So I participated in an MIT study about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little longer now, where they went through every single 40B project proposed in the Commonwealth and traced them, every single application, and traced them through fruition. Of the projects that got fought, so again, remember that we have a 90% loss ratio. When I go to court, it looks like I'm a terrible lawyer because I lose all the time. But you keep fighting. So you lose at the zone, you win at the zoning board, they say no. Developer goes to the Housing Appeals Committee, he wins there. We appeal that to the Superior Court or the Land Court, he wins there. Then you go to the appeals court beyond that, and he wins there. So that's like a 6 to 7 year cycle right there. So what do developers do? They develop. What do developers not like to do? They don't like to not develop. So this is valuable. You fight. Now, usually, so there's 2 things that happen in the fight. Either market changes and people walk away. Well, it's 3 things. Either a developer legs it out. You have to know your audience. If I'm litigating against Avalon Bay, which is highly equitized company and can spread all of their money around, they're harder to litigate against because they can leg out the litigation because they're building like 10 other projects. If I have to litigate against a guy who has 1 or 2 projects in tow, that's harder for him to do. If he's not making money, then he's really got to make a deal with us. Sometimes they go away. More often we make a deal. So for us to change a 90% loss ratio into a 50%, that's what the MIT stats said. When towns fight, 50% of the time, they either settle on terms favorable to the town or the developer goes away. Those are good. Here's the other reason you do it. So let's say it cost me, let's say, a condo project of 60 units. Let's say in that condo project of 60 units, there's going to be so many police trips, fire trips, ambulance trips, plus 10 or 15 school kids in that project, whatever, however many, maybe more. The cost to the town for that, over and above, the taxes. If that project isn't getting built, I'm not going to say it's like litigation is free, but if you're paying a lawyer $25,000 a year to fight, and you're saving, everyone can go look at the stats of what it costs to educate a school kid, or what an ambulance run costs, or what the roadway or the sewer infrastructure costs there. It's not free money, but it's expensive to the town to manage housing. And it is true that for the larger, more expensive homes, which don't get built under 40B, those might be cash positive, a 1,600-foot condo with 2 kids in it, or a smaller house that doesn't have the market value, is not cash positive. It's just not.
And they don't have, I mean, I just remember this from being at the Cleveland Street meeting, like, they don't have to take responsibility for added education, police, fire, or anything, right?
Zero.
Zero.
Well, in
like,
fairness to them, would we ask a
No.
guy that's doing a conventional project? We wouldn't ask him to do it.
So, but to bring in 145 homes at once, I mean, it's a big
But then you're
impact.
taxing
It's like it's
all of
cost,
those
yeah, I
homes.
guess.
You're taxing them, but for a smaller home, you're cash negative on residential, just on school kids alone. It's just negative, it's regressive. A large home that's valued at $800,000, $900,000 might be cash positive, but a house that's valued at $400,000 to $500,000, let alone the $200,000 one, the affordable one there, that's negative. That amount of taxes
So
it's
in our
throwing.
town, and I'm probably, can't, I just have, you probably have no idea, but in our town planners, whoever is behind the curtain planning all this stuff, did they not think about this, the possibility of this happening when they built a school and that's not gonna be able to fit?
Well, it's a good point,
Or, you
because
know, this fire.
how do you predict for something that is not legal? So the schools do take into account, they're required, when you have a school building project, like we had with Freeman Kennedy, like we had with the junior high, and what we had with the high school, you're required by law to look at your future growth, but it's your future growth based upon your master plan and your zoning bylaws, that if there was, they look at available parcels for development, and how many units could be put on there under conventional zoning. You can't predict that someone could come in and waive it, so it's only based upon what you can predict. So that's the thing. Now, in some respects, some enrollment is in flux, and I think they have some tolerances there, but I've been in some towns where a big project comes in and it's hurtful. Now, we just negotiated this project, as I was talking about in Easton with Avalon Bay, and they make a lot of money on these projects, and they gave us $2.5 million to build a new wing on the school to help us have part of the way. They spent $3 million on expanding our sewer infrastructure. Again, this is a 300-unit rental project that they manage, and they have 20 other ones in Massachusetts. So it's a different scale. But if I went to, say, like a Cleveland Street guy, I'm not going to get that kind of money, but I might get a new truck for the DPW that we don't have to spend at town meeting.
Bathrooms at the playground.
Right, well, I mean, whatever it is, I mean, you get some little bits and pieces. Does that make it worth it? No, but the deals you make are important. You negotiate early enough. Julie?
Well, you're busy fighting the ones that you decide to fight, like that take 5 or 6 years. Can you hurry up and get safe, meet your goal and get safe harbor?
It depends where they are in the pipeline. If it's already a live application to the zoning board and you meet the safe harbor in the meantime, then no. So I'll give you a story. It's kind of a hurtful story in a way. A lot of years ago, about 12 years ago, I won a project, or I won a case. So the town met their safe harbor, and there was already a project in the pipeline. So we denied it because we had met our safe harbor. And they argued, well, hey, we had already applied, and the court, and I litigated this all the way through the appeals court, the court said, no, 10% is 10%. Doesn't matter, you're off. I don't care if you were 10 minutes away from getting your approval when they got to their safe harbor, you're done. And a month after that, the state changed the rules. So, I mean, it's a constant moving target. It's frustrating, but that's essentially what it is. Now, what is the other benefit of fighting, though, that I think is important? Developers don't want to fight. The good developers won't fight. The good developers will come in and say, what can I do? So I know that there's a project off of Lawrence Street, and I know it's a big project. I think there's some issues with that project. I love that land further back, not the gravel part. But what is the developer doing right now, to my knowledge, is he's at least talking to people. He hasn't applied yet, and they're talking. That's helpful. When a developer knows that a town may be willing to fight, either if they're a developer on a poor piece of land, they're not going to come. So not that I'm, any tougher than any other lawyer, but if they know I'm town council in a town, and they know that I have a history of fighting these things, and they have a history, the developers have a history of spending 300 grand on lawyers' fees fighting with me over 5 years, that's not something they want to do. So either they're going to work with us because they see that out there, or they're going to go to the next town. It's the towns that roll over because they've said, oh, it's 40B, there's nothing we can do. They keep getting rolled over on. It's a cycle, and that's why it's important. Kevin, back there?
While you're on that subject, would you mind talking about the local initiative program? And
Sure.
how that ties in?
So I spoke before a little bit about friendly projects. The local initiative program, or a local initiative project, is where it's essentially a three-party deal. Most are a two-party deal. Subsidizing agency and developer come in and try and beat the town over the head with 40B. If someone came in with a great project that the town objectively liked, or the town knew this was one that they could make a deal on, it becomes a three-party deal where the selectmen would work, they would be a signatory, the developer would be a signatory, and the Department of Housing and Community Development, the state's true subsidizing agency, they do a three-party deal. It's called a local initiative project. It's cooperative. Generally, it doesn't mean that it's the greatest thing ever, but it's where they make a deal to what they do called a friendly project. It works better for the developers, and towns can usually negotiate their mitigation up front, their ball field or their donations to the school, or change it or use better architecture. The good developers that I've worked with do that well. Is anyone familiar with the shovel shops in Easton? Anyone know that? So that was a project. We had a terrible developer there. He wanted to tear it down. It was like the 11th most endangered historic site in the country at one point. It's H.H. Richardson architecture. It's really a beautiful site, and the developer was going to tear it down. We fought them for 3 years. They walk away. A new guy comes in and says, I want to save it all. He had the money to do it. I need you to step up and give me some loans through your Community Preservation Committee. I need you to endorse me through the local initiative project as well as in a tax credit program. And I will save every single building. That was a guy we made a deal with. And he installed our sewer for the center of town that fed a bunch of towns that had a bunch of properties that had failing septic systems. He's making money. It takes him a little bit longer, but he had literally from beginning to end, his permitting process was 4 months. And then you get other people who say, well, I'm going to just hit the town over the head, and 4 years later, they're still trying and not making any money. So you tell me which makes more sense. Over time, the cream rises to the top, hopefully, and we get some people that can work with, but great question, Kevin.
How is emergency access determined to be reasonable and not reasonable? So if you're taking like a small road, you're going to build 56, 55 plus condos.
I usually start with talking to my fire chief. If my fire chief is uncomfortable about getting his vehicles up there, then that's an issue. To frame it in the way the cases have come down, single access, so the town has a rule, as almost all towns do, against single access subdivisions. Cul-de-sacs that are longer than, say, 1,000 feet or so. And the reason is that if there's a blockage in a single access development and the last house has burnt the microwave popcorn, they're up in flames, you can't get there. That's why we like things with two means of access without too steep a slopes. So if there was a 40B project proposed in town that had a lengthy one-way access up a steep hill all the way to units way in the back. Those are cases that have been persuasive. And planners and fire chiefs will universally say, that's a problem for me, because if it's the middle of the night and the middle of winter and the roads are narrow and it's dark and it's icy and one of my trucks can't get up that hill, or the road's too narrow or there's a disabled car there or whatever and I can't get there, that's a problem. We've had success there. And so that's been, and because 40B happens so often on sites that have limited frontage, it's really a common characteristic that's been a tool that we've used pretty successfully.
So how does the average citizen fight that? I mean, you keep talking about the fight, but like...
Show up, if it's important to you, it should be important to the zoning board. Again, citizens have their right to appeal things too. Their success rate is even worse. But obviously they're not going to, average citizen isn't gonna be able to reach into their pocket and spend, or want to spend $30,000 to $40,000. Convince the zoning board that it's important, that there's some real impacts, that there is a major traffic thing. So sometimes, if anyone is in the construction business, then they know what I'm talking about. If you have to go get a traffic study, usually you're gonna be able to find a traffic engineer that's gonna say, hey, fine, you know, level of service is okay, maybe you'll have a little bit of a queue here and there, and usually they'll find someone to say it's okay. I kind of have this feeling, if a traffic engineer is saying that no one ever has to wait there, I mean, he's basing it on statistics and number of cars and the routes, and it's a computer model, but I have 50 residents show up and say, I wait there every day at rush hour for like 30 seconds, and now you're going to add 1,500 more car trips a day. That's a real issue. They can't all be wrong. Yeah, there's going to be some people that show up to meetings that are a little beyond the bend and might be a little hysterical about things. But if 50 people show up and say, that's a problem, then it's likely a problem. So that helps them say, look, traffic engineer, I get your computer model. I want you out there on Thursday at drive time, and I want you to actually count cars. I mean, so these are things that are
selectmen meetings?
zoning board of appeals. Yeah, that's where there's a public hearing, where you have a right to talk.
But only abutters are notified of the first public hearing.
Abutters,
Like
abutters to abutters.
I hear you.
Right, yes, there, and then back to you.
Along the lines of the initiative, are there, which is usually a developer-initiated process, in your experience, have you seen
Not always,
projects?
but yeah.
Have you seen projects or towns that have taken steps to incentivize developers to perform friendly projects that help them get to their 10% number?
Yeah, well, we did the Avalon project in Easton as a LIP, you know, and only to get the units. But we did the shovel shop project in Easton because it was a good project, and we actually extended our own money. We lent them money.
Did Easton approach Avalon Bay?
No, but we did approach the developer when we kicked out the old one. We approached the other one for the shovel shops because we knew we had a history of doing architecturally good work in terms of historical renovation. So we found the developer.
But the connection there was a direct reach out. It wasn't necessarily a zoning regulation that incentivized.
Just being creative. It's having creative. Again, I mean, while I have 2 candidates left here for planning board, that's the kind of creativity. Everyone in this room will put you on the spot and make sure you earn it when you become planning board members. There's so much you can do. There's so much proactive, even much more so than the zoning board. Or your board of selectmen, you know, this is show up and please volunteer for boards. Do all this stuff. Yeah, you can be way proactive. And I'm not saying this town isn't being proactive. It's hard. So I'm getting some cues that we're kind of getting a little long in the tooth here. Does anyone have any questions on something that they haven't heard?
Does the state consider the neighbors' property values at all going down or not?
It would have to be a real extreme example. They might, but it's a rare one. I think that here's the way the state would view it is, if you're next to a vacant lot that could be developed anyway, then you have some risk there. It depends upon, you have to look at the project itself. If you're building, say it's and this was an issue in Medfield, there was a neighborhood right behind one side of the project that was a 40B itself of like 1.5-story homes, and they were doing a 4-story building, like literally right in their backyard, and they thought that the impact to them, not just with respect to shadows and it looming over them, but in terms of their use and enjoyment of their property and the value of it was important. But it's really, it would take the context. You'd have to look at
This is Franklin, and it's a street with 1 to 2 acre lots. It's all single-family residential, and one neighbor has 10 acres. He wants to drop something right there.
I think you'd have to look at the building design itself. I hate to say it, but I'm not sure you're going to get a tremendous amount of empathy or sympathy from them. I mean, it would depend upon the buildings itself. I think it's a fantastic thing to talk about, maybe more in context of, hey, Franklin has its high density zone, this ain't it. So the planning objectives that we talked about before. So, back there.
Do you know anything about the Boy Scout land or the?
I know a lot.
Is it a done deal or is it?
I don't think it's
There's a problem with it maybe?
as a former member of the Conservation Commission, I can tell you there's a lot of issues on that site.
So, I mean, you can see it was approved by Mass Housing, I mean, that part's done, because you can see it right on the town
Yeah,
website.
so they approved 90% of their projects, yeah. That's only the beginning.
Just real quickly, in that Mass Housing approval letter, it talked about, addressing the concerns of abutters with respect to privacy and vegetation buffer. How much pull does the average, do I have as an abutter?
Mass Housing does that all the time, and then they blow it off on the back
It
end.
doesn't matter.
So it's important that the zoning board holds the developer to that kind of review. I was never an opponent of some development of the Boy Scout land. I was a proponent that we buy it when we could have had it for $200,000 many years ago, but
Because it's not, I mean, it's been 20 years or something since the Boy Scouts have owned it, right?
boy, you're aging.
All right,
So-
well, but who did they sell it to? Did they sell it to this developer who's been sitting on it?
Well, they sold it to a developer, and he sat on it and kind of went belly up, and then this is round two. I don't know, there's problems with that site. Could there end up being a project at some scale that is manageable, which won't impact traffic or the wetlands over there as locally defined? There's probably something that could happen there. There's always been something that could happen there from a development perspective, but I think I'd have to look at the plan, but not an easy site to develop.
But they proposed a 55 and over community back there, that's what they sent to Mass Housing, and that's what Mass Housing already approved.
Which is crazy because we've already, and I'm a huge fan of 55 and over housing. When Mass Housing, they're totally not consistent. In towns that don't have a stitch of over 55 housing, they say, no, we can't do that, we want to promote families. Norfolk, where we have a bunch of great 55 and over places, and we're going to do another one rather than provide family housing. This is, I mean, there's a subtle hypocrisy there, but you don't get me started too much. I want to wrap it up pretty quick. Kevin, you had one?
Very quickly, could you just confirm that there is a piece of the legislation in place that allows a town to be able to have a cap at the number of units that they have in front of their ZBA at a given time, allowing them to push anything else that comes along until one of those projects comes out with a decision?
There's a cap, not on the, I don't think on the number that they could be considering it at any given time. There's a cap on the number of units in any single project. You can't hold another developer responsible for the people of them in line. The state does consider how many you have in front of you. I'm not, there's been discussion on that, but so I think that the way these things are spread out right now, what we have in front of us, I don't think that there's going to be much there. And the other thing is, if a developer was about to hit it, you just wait, and then the cap goes away. I see that too. I mean, they're smart enough to know that. Anyone else before we take off right here?
Is the Southwood project dead?
Right now it is.
Jay, with the cap heat talking about something about no more than 3 projects in a given year that can go in front of the ZBA?
Not aware of that.
You never heard
Be
that?
awesome.